Any idea what those two pieces I just played have in common? There are several things in common. Matthew, you know one thing, obviously, right?
D major.
D major. They're both in the same keys, it turns out. But that's the least important thing of what I'm going to be talking about. But that is the most obvious. Then the other thing is, one is this piece, and the other one is, well, they're both using the octaves of the D, but besides that, they're both from what era?
Baroque?
Baroque. Yeah, the Baroque era. You know, that's after Renaissance and before Classical. You know, right? I don't think of the Baroque era. The Baroque era is concerned with filigree, with design, with everything. Think about Baroque angels and cherubs and how ornate the churches were in that period. The music also has a certain ornate and edged and scalloped kind of feel to it. But underneath that is strong structure. I often think that if music were a watch, if music were a timepiece, the Baroque people were concerned with how the gears fit together, how it turned that thing exactly. Isn't it wonderful that we have this thing that can keep exact time and everything fits together and turns like perfectly, you know, and it's the mechanism, it's how it looks. Where when you get to the Romantic era, it's more like, or you get to the Classical era, it's more like the structure of this clock. It'd be like, you know, there's a clock tower there, and that's telling us time, and there's structure, and then you get to the Romantic era, and it becomes something more like he looks at his watch, and he's transported to a different time, and suddenly he's in the future, or he's in the past, and he's in love, and you know, so there are different qualities of looking at that watch, but the Baroque is very much concerned with how things fit together. And there's another reason those two pieces are related. One is the first one. This is by who? Didn't everybody do it in high school? My high school did it. Everybody did it. It's called the Vivaldi Gloria by Antonio Vivaldi. You know, Gloria, 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 Gloria. In excelsis, right? In excelsis Deo. And this, and the other piece is by this. Yeah, Johann Sebastian Bach, one of the many Bachs, but Johann Sebastian being the most famous. And the Baroque era is actually defined generally by Bach's birth and death dates, by 1865 to 1750. The other thing that these two pieces have in common, and that these two composers have in common, is that they both died on this day, July 28th. Vivaldi in 1840, so it's the Ides of July. Vivaldi in the scary part of July. Vivaldi is 1841, and Bach is 1741, and 1741. Thank you, and Bach is 1750. And the dates of the Baroque generally are Bach's lifespan, 1865. To 1750. 1885, not 65. He was 65 years old, so I'm thinking he's in 1885 to 1750. So, he lived to be 65, and Vivaldi 63. Vivaldi was just a little ahead of him, but Bach very much admired Vivaldi and thought his music was wonderful. In fact, he set 6 of his concerti. Bach reset them for orchestra, and so. And Vivaldi was very influential in the concerto. But I'm going to talk about Bach more, in terms of like helping a little bit more window into what happens in the Baroque. So there are many elements about the Baroque that are important. First of all is something called an imitative texture. What do we mean by an imitative texture? Well, one hand in the piano case, or in a keyboard case, the cembalo or harpsichord, or clavier at those days, they weren't as grand or as resonant or as large at this. The range was about that, more like 4 octaves on most keyboard instruments at the time. But this keyboard, each hand would imitate the other. Now there are other elements which we're going to talk about a little bit: ornamentation, clarity of the line, but. For example, this is something that most people play. the beginning of the C major invention, the first of many inventions that Bach wrote. An invention has two voices generally, two voices. There are some three-voice inventions, I think, but most of them have two voices. Interesting enough, these two voices manage to imply harmony strongly. So we've gone from the tonic chord, and the tonic's always the one chord, right? Back in these days, they numbered the chords. In C major, 1, 2 is a minor chord, 3 is a minor chord, 4 is a major chord, 5 is a major chord, that's the dominant chord, 6 is a minor chord, 7 is a diminished chord, an unstable chord, which is why the pull of that always wants to resolve there, because the instability of that chord. But the fifth, so 1 to 5 is the most basic progression in music, coming from the overtone series, as we've talked about before. That in that sound, you actually have the fifth. If the note you're hearing is sympathetically vibrating off of this note. I didn't play that part, see? I didn't play it, I just pressed it silently so it would open up, and then... But the truth is, if you listen, you can hear that note. Hear it in there? It's in the sound. So is this, so is this, so is this, and so is this. There's an entire chord in that sound. So the dominant was a very, very important chord. So in most pieces in Bach, the play between tonic and dominant becomes very, very important. And it's very important in inventions and fugues. So we hear this. That's a dominant feel. Now when I say they imply the chords, if I would... I'm adding all kinds of extra notes to the harmonies. So you can harmonize Bach by hearing the implied in those two voices. Now, how can two voices imply harmony? Harmony is always three voices, right? So a chord is all three voices define a chord, right? If that middle one is that, it's a major chord. If that one is this, it's a minor chord with a minor third in the bottom. Likewise, it could be a diminished chord, an augmented chord, but three notes only form a chord. So when you have two voices only, the chords are implied. Those two voices could be the bottom of a chord. They could be the bottom of this chord, or they could be the top of this chord, or they could be in jazz, or in different harmonies, sometimes in Bach even, the top two notes of a seventh chord, for example. So harmonies can get implied in Bach very, very much. And in the inventions, the thing about playing them is the clarity of the two lines and how they imitate each other, how they play, and how the harmonies progress. So in this simple little invention, like I said, but almost anybody who's a pianist has studied, we hear the harmonies progress clearly from place to place. To the dominant, back to the tonic, and now a sequence. But with that F sharp, we're suddenly out of the field of C major. That F sharp is taking us into G major. And now we're in the dominant G major, clearly. That F sharp. Now we're back to F naturals, back to F naturals, which is getting us back towards C. And there we are, but it doesn't stay there. With a C sharp and a B flat, we're going to new territory. Again, the sequence. Now we're in A minor. Imitation, taking us to D minor, to G major, back to the dominant, and back to the tonic. And the B flat implies the subdominant, or F. Back to C. Directly in F, and in the dominant to the tonic. There's an old story about, thank you. There's an old story about Bach's children, about one of his 20-odd children, 20 children, no stops on his organ, they used to say. So, and the kid, for some reason, just stopped there. And Bach supposedly got up out of bed and went, because he couldn't stand it. So the pull of the dominant to the tonic is very, very important. Now, we get beyond the two-part invention that way, and there's also famous ones. This one, for example, is imitated to the point of being almost a canon. Now, what is a canon? A canon is when two lines imitate each other exactly. Not imitation, da 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 da. They're slightly different in the way they begin, and they dovetail differently. This one is really exact for a while. Right to there. I left him a little haywire, but if I were to play those lines instead of one bar apart from each other as they're written, here's one bar, 3, 4, and the second bar. If I play them together, it's this. It's the same thing, you listen, till we get to here. What happens. Now, why? Why did it get out of sync? Because in a fugue, or in this case, an invention, there's a real answer and a tonal answer. Why do you need a tonal answer? Well, the distance of that dominant is 5 notes up. And to get back to the tonic from there up is only 4 notes. So sometimes we have to change the 5th to a 4th. In order to make things work out right. Now, in a fugue, and Bach wrote, this is the first book of the Well-Tempered Clavier. It has 24 preludes and 24 fugues, coupled. Prelude, fugue, etc. They are in every key, every basic key. So the first one's in C major, and this one, of course, is a famous prelude, which, Gounod used as the accompaniment for his Ave Maria. But this was written by Bach. The idea of a prelude has one configuration that goes over and over. So, but it has a fugue with it. And what is a fugue? A fugue has a subject. The subject of the fugue is simply a theme that you hear coming in throughout the theme. And it has a number of voices. The subject for the C major fugue happens to be this. That's it, okay? Now it goes on. Okay, this is a 3-voice fugue. So first you hear the alto voice come in. Soprano, hear it? Above it, while the other voice does other things. Then the tenor or the bass. And the bass here. So 4 voices directly in. Now look. Those are exact answers. But they're not always exact answers. For example, in the B flat minor fugue, and some of these fugues are not as sprightly as that. This one's very somber, but the fugue is a simple, really, 6-note theme, really, or 6, maybe a little more, but it's this. That's basically the fugue theme. But this is a drop of a fourth. 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 notes down. And then slightly bigger than an octave. The answer, however, can't, if it were a fourth, it would take us to a key that would be a little unwieldy. We suddenly would be changing keys. So Bach, in order to keep it in B flat minor, makes the second drop not a fourth, but a fifth. In other words, the second one comes in on that note and goes down 5 notes. So they are the same theme, but this is called a tonal answer to the theme. So, and this is a marvelous fugue. I haven't played it in 40 years, but I was on my senior recital in college. This is called an episode. Little connection of sequence between the themes. But we're not done yet, because this is a 5-voice fugue. Here comes a bass. Now those get pretty tight, but this has one of the tightest entrances of the fugue that there is, because between these entrances of the fugue, there are these things called episodes, and they will take you to different places, and they're usually sequential, they do sequences. But in this case, at the very end of this fugue, he does, because it's the drop of the fourth, and the other is the drop of a fifth, he puts the ending note of one of those drops as the beginning note of the other. So here's one starting, another one starts here, another one starts there, another one starts there, another one starts there, all the way down. And all of the connecting all work. Listen, at the end we get to. Here we go. Listen. Very dramatic. So the fugues can be very, very thorny, but there's a famous fugue which you'll know. Now, the prelude to this fugue is this. C minor, the second one. As I said, a figure that repeats itself over and over is the idea of a prelude. But the fugue in this is famous, and it's 3 voices, and I think if you really listen, you'll be able to hear when the fugues come in. So there are 3 voices. There's going to be a top one. First, we're going to come into the alto, the middle voice, then the top voice. Then, after a little episode, there'll be an entrance in the tenor voice, or the lower voice. So it's 3 voices fugues. There'll be several episodes that are sequences. Now, what I mean by sequence? A sequence is the same pattern in different keys, right? Another key, that's a sequence. You hear it, how it happens. And then again, same material in a second. So those sequences happen a lot in this, and they happen between the sections where the fugue enters. So this is the C minor fugue from Bach's Well-Tempered Clavier, Book 1. I find it very hard to go from talking to playing. Very odd. It's like different. It's like the other side of the brain. That's the click in. All right. Can't say they play guitar each time. that's. I told you I'd tell you what the last one is. So that's the C minor fugue in three voices, and you could hear it because it comes in the middle, sometimes they're different. But I just wanted to leave you with something a little more delightful and less heavy than that. So a very quick little look at the prelude that comes right after that. So he goes right from there to this wonderful thing, which is the last thing I'll play, which is the prelude in C sharp. Thank you.
That's what, Janas.